President Biden says there will be consequences for Saudi Arabia after the kingdom sided with other oil-producing countries to significantly cut production. Less oil on the market means the cost of a barrel goes up. Oil prices inevitably trickle down to gas prices, and that cost is rising again after falling from highs this summer. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of regular was $3.92 on Wednesday. That's up 9 cents from a week ago. The Biden administration called the move by OPEC to reduce oil output by 2 million barrels a day short-sighted and said it directly benefits Russia and Vladimir Putin. In an interview with CNN, President Biden confirmed the U.S. will reevaluate its relationship with Saudi Arabia.
Do you think it's time for the U.S. to rethink its relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I am in the process when this House and Senate gets back. They're going to have to. There's going to be some consequences for what they've done with Russia.
What kind of consequences? Menendez says suspend all arms sales. Is that something you'd consider?
I'm not going to get into what I'd consider and what I have in mind, but there will be consequences.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now. She's traveling with the president in Marina del Rey, California. Nancy, the president said in that interview he's not going to get into what the consequences might be, but what consequences might he be thinking about?
Well, his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, did say today that they are taking a hard look at the possibility of freezing arms sales, but he said they're looking at all of the options on the table. So he wouldn't tip his hand other than to say that they are indeed considering that option. Other options being floated include pulling all U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia. That's something that Bernie Sanders suggested, senator from Vermont. Democrats are furious, and they are pushing the president to get more specific more quickly about what it is he is willing to do. White House officials and a lot of Democrats on Capitol Hill view this, John, as a betrayal of sorts, because White House officials spent weeks lobbying Saudi Arabia and the other OPEC plus nations not to cut oil production. The president himself even went to Saudi Arabia this summer to try to kickstart this relationship with the Saudis. And now they feel as though the rug has been pulled out from under them at a time when, global oil supply is at risk. They think that this is going to help Russia, that it is going to boost Russian oil revenue at a key time. And so that's why you've got the president making these very vague threats, saying there's going to be some kind of consequence. The problem is that all of these consequences have some downsides for the U.S. as well.
And I want to get to those downsides in a minute, Nancy, but to the extent that one can ever tell, how do they view it at the White House? That the president's outreach to Mohammed bin Salman was a gambit that wasn't likely to do well, but was worth trying? Or was it one they really thought might work and they're really surprised? What's their assessment of his outreach that at least in this respect, doesn't look like it paid off?
You know, they always argued that the president's decision to visit Saudi Arabia was not going to involve a direct push for the Saudis to pump more oil. I have to say that was an argument that didn't gain a lot of traction among the press. Most reporters assumed that the president wouldn't be making a trip like that, particularly at this time in the midst of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if he didn't want to try to ensure that some of the largest oil-producing nations might boost supply if necessary. So they argue that this was a necessary trip, that Saudi Arabia is a strategic partner in the region. In fact, some might argue the second most strategic partner in the Middle East after Israel, because the Red Sea is protected in large part by Saudi Arabia. Half of the world's oil travels through the Red Sea. And so this is an important geopolitical partner when it comes to countering Iran, when it comes to counterterrorism. Certainly financially, the Iranians have, by some estimates, up to $1 trillion worth of investments in the U.S. And so the White House would argue that it was in the president's interest to have that meeting with top Saudi officials, whether or not they ended up doing what he wanted, which was to pump more oil.
Shalom, Israel. First and foremost, I would like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rekah, Quadash. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone, who rule well and who taught me this truth. And a sincere salutations to the Tabernacle of David, you Akim pushing this truth to the four corners of the earth in all truth, faith, and sincerity. And a healthy shalom to the Akwath who are also listening and learning. It's Zakaria coming at you with another lesson, and Lord's willing, it be edifying. So I would like to start this lesson off with Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 1. And it reads, "Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed." And I'm also going to get it in the NIV. And it reads, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees." All right. And woe means destruction. Okay. And the reason why I wanted to start with this precept is because Sleepy Creepy Joe vows payback on Saudi Arabia and OPEC. Okay, these other oil producing countries. He says that there's going to be consequences for Saudi Arabia for choosing to side with Russia over the U.S. Now, they talked about two ways in which they can have these consequences take effect on Saudi Arabia. Now, they said, one, they could suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Two, they can pull all U.S. troops out. Now, I don't believe they're going to do any one of those, simply because I ran across an article by NPR, and it's titled, "Some Lawmakers Push Back on the Oil Cartel OPEC with a Bill They Called NOPEC." All right. Now, we know how Esau Edom works. So once again, Isaiah 10 and 1, NIV, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees." Now I want to play a little bit of this article and bring out the rest of these precepts, okay? And Lord's willing to be edifying.
The White House and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are threatening to punish OPEC Plus member nations over their decision to dramatically cut oil production. Lawmakers say a drop in oil supply would again drive gas prices up in the U.S. To put pressure on Saudi Arabia in particular, members of Congress, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, want to revive legislation called NOPEC, the No Oil Producing and Exporting Cartels Act. If the bill became law, it would allow the Justice Department to sue Saudi Arabia and other OPEC nations for illegal price fixing. For more, we're joined by Ellen Wald. She's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and author of the book Saudi Inc., The Arabian Kingdom's Pursuit of Profit and Power. Good morning. Thanks for being on the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So let's say this were to pass. What would the ability to sue OPEC nations mean for the U.S. and U.S. consumers?
Essentially, it would mean that the Attorney General could sue countries that produce oil and are members of OPEC. So they could be sued for price fixing, which is technically illegal in the United States. The issue that we're talking about for American consumers is that these countries could retaliate against American interests, first of all, but it could also hurt the overall oil supply. We could see a reduction in global oil supply as a result. We could have countries not wanting to sell to the U.S., which is an important part of our global oil supply. We could also see these countries retaliate against U.S. interests in their countries, including nationalizing American oil interests in those countries.
So you described a lot of different ways that there could be retaliation here, but there's a lot of support and anger over what's happened with oil supply and an assumption that Saudi Arabia, a U.S. ally, is backing Russia with this move.
Now, who gives America, Babylon the Great, the right to pass, bills and legislation that affects other countries? What's what I'm looking for? Assets. Okay, so to speak. Okay, that's oil belongs to Saudi Arabia, and they can do with it as they please. Now, how prideful must you be to write up legislation in your country that affects a totally different country, which you have no right and have nothing to do with? You see? What is it? In Habakkuk it says his desire is as hell. He cannot be satisfied. And it's the same thing that, these Edomites are doing with, the Nord Stream 2, sticking their noses in other nations' businesses, and ultimately all this is going to bite America, Babylon the Great in the ass, because, I kind of feel like they're going to take this route because Joe Biden, in the clip that I played prior, said when the House and the Senate get back, there will be consequences. So that kind of leads me to believe that, this bill that they call NOPEC could be the consequences in which Joe Biden was hinting at or speaking of. Okay, because he said, well, he didn't say, but the news anchor said that the U.S. felt betrayed, man. They felt as if the rug was pulled from underneath them. That's how they felt. So with that being said, let me get another precept. This is Obadiah chapter 1 and verse 7. And it reads, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. Okay, and this this is a big blow to America by Saudi Arabia by choosing Russia. Okay, America definitely wasn't expecting this because the news anchor, she said that they spent weeks lobbying to to Saudi Arabia, and they really didn't see this coming. Okay, so what is Obadiah 1 and 7 says? All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. It says the men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. Matter of fact, let's get this in the NIV. Let's get it in the NIV, because we're living in beautiful times, man. We're witnessing the downfall of our enemies, the downfall of America the Great, America, Babylon the Great, in real time, man. Okay, so this is Obadiah 1 and 7 in the NIV version. All your allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you, but you will not detect it. Right, because the pride of your heart, man. The pride is not going to allow you to see this right hook that's going to put you down for the count ultimately. Okay, so let's go back to the article and finish it out.
Russia with this move. Is it possible that Saudi is just looking at their own bottom line, that they needed to prop up the price of oil for their own economic reasons? But there's a lot of support and anger
against U.S.
Just gonna rewind it a little bit, Akim.
interests in their countries, including nationalizing American oil interests in those countries.
So you described a lot of different ways that there could be retaliation here, but there's a lot of support and anger over what's happened with oil supply and an assumption that Saudi Arabia, U.S. ally, is backing Russia with this move. Is it possible that Saudi is just looking at their own bottom line, that they needed to prop up the price of oil for their own economic reasons?
I think Saudi Arabia sees what's going on in the global oil market and is very concerned about the possibility of a global recession and that could cause a major drop in oil prices like we saw in 2008. They are looking to head this off. But when you look at the actual amount of barrels that are going to come off the market from this cut, we're talking about a lot less than 2 million barrels a day because OPEC isn't producing up to its quotas. So this is a cut of the quotas that OPEC has, but most countries aren't even producing that much. So we're talking maybe 300 million barrels a day to 600 million. I'm sorry, 600,000 barrels a day, which is a lot less than they said.
Now, you mentioned that legislation like NOPEC might risk some retaliation. How would it affect the U.S.-Saudi relationship?
I think it would become very difficult. The issue is if this lawsuit actually goes through the legal system, what kind of things could we see happen down the line? So would the United States try to seize Saudi asset in the United States in order to collect? And that could lead to some very difficult issues between the United States and Saudi Arabia, particularly for Americans in Saudi Arabia, Americans doing business in Saudi Arabia, but also Saudis who do business in the U.S. And that includes the Aramco refinery in the United States, which is the largest refinery in the U.S., the Motiva refinery in Texas.
And bottom line, would legislation like NOPEC help at the gas pump, which is what a lot of Americans care about?
I don't think it would help at the gas pump at all. We're seeing a lot of issues at the gas pump that are maybe somewhat related to OPEC, but are not entirely related to OPEC. We've got a lot of issues in the United States. We don't have as large a refining capacity as we had. And if we start to sue these other countries that have sovereign immunity, then we're probably actually going to see gas prices go up because these countries are going to be reluctant to do business with the United States out of the fear that their assets could just be taken from them as a result of these lawsuits.
Ellen Wald is a senior.
All right, let's get one more precept and close it out. This is Isaiah chapter 33 and verse 1, and it reads, "Woe to thee that spoileth, and thou was not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled. And when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee." Hey, you reap what you sow. And that's what you're witnessing, okay? You know, all the nations that America, Babylon, and Great has dealt treacherously with, and all their allies that have sat back and watched America do foul businesses, have foul business practices, break laws and treaties and just be the wicked that the Bible speaks of that they are. All right. Now it's time for them to deal treacherously with America, Babylon the Great. All right. So Lord's willing, this was edifying. Shalom, Israel. Wa Abad Babal.